Kris van Hapsburg. I want to talk about loss of Dutch nationality. More or less how to prevent it from happening so that you don't have to become a customer and us helping to repair the situation. In order not to lose your Dutch nationality, you should know how you can lose it. One of the main reasons, there are two main reasons, there are more, but the two main reasons that people lose their nationality is: one, you accept the nationality of another country. You request it and accept it, you take it. You naturalize. For example, if you become French, you could lose your Dutch nationality. It doesn't matter, you live in the EU, you take any other nationality, you could lose your Dutch nationality. Now, there are exceptions to that. For example, imagine that you were born in France and you didn't become French because both your parents were Dutch, but you were born there, you lived there for, I don't know, 26 years, 32 years, and you decide you want to become French. That would result in loss, but because you were born in the country and you live there at the time where you get the French nationality, that is an exception in Dutch law. You would not lose your Dutch nationality. Okay? So that's the exception one. Exception two is your parents moved to maybe New Zealand, and you lived in New Zealand for at least 5 years while you were a minor. Okay, a minor according to Dutch law. Before 1985, that was age 21 when you would become an adult, and after 1985 it is age 18 that you become an adult. Okay, so imagine you live for 5 years in New Zealand and you become or you request the New Zealand nationality, then you would not lose your Dutch nationality. Okay, you're going to have to evidence that you lived in New Zealand for 5 or plus years. Okay, but you wouldn't automatically lose your Dutch nationality. Now, the third exception is you are married to somebody of the country whose nationality you take. So imagine that you have an Argentinian spouse. Okay. Now, if you want to become Argentinian, then you would not lose your nationality if your spouse is Argentinian. You need to be married at least one day before you become Argentinian, until at least one day after you became Argentinian. Okay? What happened before or after doesn't matter. On the day that you become Argentinian, you need to be already married to the person. Okay, that is the third exception. Now, with that, a civil registered partnership that is accepted by the Netherlands, okay, is the same as marriage. Okay, so if you have a civil registered partnership, then that would qualify you as well. However, it needs to be accepted by the Netherlands, and some foreign civil registered partnerships, there are, for instance, in Australia, a couple of them that is not accepted by the Netherlands. So always double check that you comply with the exception. Okay, marriage is safer, civil registered partnership is possible, but make sure that it's accepted by the Netherlands. Okay. Now, I said, you need to be married on the day that you become Argentinian. Make sure that nothing happens to your spouse, because if there would be a car accident or you went, I don't know, hang gliding afterwards, and your spouse would come to pass away, they would die, then unfortunately, on that day, your marriage would be dissolved by death. And of course, that's a situation where suddenly you don't comply with the exception anymore. So be careful crossing the road that day. Right, so we discussed the exceptions on the first method of loss. Okay. Now the second method of loss is when you have another nationality already. Okay. So imagine by exception you were able to become a Kiwi, New Zealander, okay, or Australian, or Argentinian, or French, or whatever nationality you have, okay. Then you could later on still lose your Dutch nationality through a so-called 13-year clock, okay. This clock works in a specific way. I'll explain that because that will explain to you how to avoid the loss, okay. Now historically there were other clocks. There was a 5-year clock, there's a 10-year clock version 1, a 10-year clock version 2, a 10-year clock version 3, and through those changes of the versions of the clocks, many people lost their nationality. I discussed that earlier. The last two changes were 1985 and 2003, and that resulted in thousands of people losing their nationality without even realizing it. So keep an eye on the law and changes to the law as well. My company will start a service where we keep people updated, but that's not in place yet. Okay. Now, how to avoid loss through the current 13-year clock version 1. I say version 1 because there might be a version 2 coming. Hopefully they cancel the whole thing, but you never know. You need to know that this clock is like an alarm clock. It starts ticking the moment you are an adult, you have another nationality together with the Dutch one, okay, and you live outside the EU, not outside the Netherlands, outside the European Union, okay. So when those three factors come together, okay, so imagine you already have a dual nationality but you become an adult and you live outside the EU. That is when those factors come together. So it doesn't matter which one is first, they need to be together in place at the same time. That's when the clock starts ticking. At the end of the 13-year clock, you would lose your Dutch nationality. Now, this would be automatic, okay? You can restart that clock by getting a Dutch passport. The date of issue of the passport, not the date of application, but the date of issue of a Dutch passport would restart the clock, okay? So that way you can move on and delay the loss for as long as you keep renewing and replacing your Dutch passport. The other two documents do the same, and that is a Dutch nationality certificate and a Dutch ID card. The date of issue of those, okay? Not the date of application. So that is how you can avoid loss. Another method of avoiding loss is by, imagine you live in Argentina and your clock has been ticking already for 9 years and you move to Spain, okay? Now you live inside the EU, okay? You don't have to move back to the Netherlands, you can move to any European Union country, okay? Inside the EU, that clock will stop ticking, but only after you live there for a year. So don't say, I have my Argentinian passport only, I'm gonna move to Spain because it's possible to live there with my Argentinian passport somehow. And I don't need a Dutch passport, so the clock keeps ticking over that 10 years, that 12 years, and at year 12 you move to Spain and you think, right, I am here before the 13-year clock finished, therefore I will stay Dutch. Yes, if you are there at least a year before, okay? So if you arrive in Spain at 12 years and 2 months, then sorry, it doesn't work. Then you better, before the 13 years are up, get a Dutch passport. Okay? Which may be difficult after such a long time, and it could delay things in getting a passport issued. And remember, it's a date of issue, so be on time with all this kind of stuff. Okay? So living in the EU for at least a year would stop the 13-year clock and pause it on 0. So imagine that you lived in the EU, in Spain, for a year. Your clock stopped and paused on 0. Then you live there in Spain for 5 years and you decide, well, Spain is not good enough for you anymore. You want to move to Canada. Okay? So you're Argentinian, moving to Canada, and on your Canadian or your Argentinian passport, you arrive there. The moment you arrive in Canada and become resident there, not for holiday, but become resident there, that is when the 13-year clock starts ticking again. Okay? Now, with all this, evidence is important, because when you later want to make use of your Dutch nationality, you want to have a passport, you want to go live in the Netherlands, or you want to go to another EU country and you want to make use of your EU freedom of movement rights as a Dutch national, then you will need a passport. And so when you request a passport, they will ask you, do you have another nationality? And if you lie, you're in trouble. Then the ways they can check practically if you're lying, really. So you will then need to evidence that you didn't become a victim of the 13-year clock version 1. Okay? Or for people who already lived abroad for longer, we're talking about the previous 10-year clock version 3. So you need to evidence that you didn't become a victim of that one. Okay? So when you renew your passport, make sure you have all the evidence to show where you were living. And that's not always easy, because in some countries, in many countries, they don't have a civil registrar system that keeps record of your residency. Okay? Like in the UK. In the UK was never conquered by Napoleon. And so we didn't get the Code Civil for that you have in the Netherlands, which requires you to register your address with the local municipality, the local council. That doesn't exist in the UK. So you can't get an official document from the UK that says, yes, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so lived at this address from this date to that date. You can't get that. And the Dutch officials will not understand that, because they think that everybody was conquered by Napoleon and that we all have this kind of system. But there are other documents that can show where you lived, and therefore you need to come with alternative evidence. And if you're in that situation, I would suggest you get legal advice and legal help. Okay, so if you need to evidence certain things, and it might be difficult, or you apply for a passport and you don't get it, then come to get legal help, because you're going to need it. Another thing is that I mentioned the UK. My company is based in the UK, and the UK, since Brexit, is no longer in the EU. So people who lived in the EU and that clock didn't tick for them, unfortunately, with Brexit, that clock started ticking for you. Okay, so people in the UK, I meet them every day. Really? This can happen to me? I thought I was British and Dutch and could remain like that forever. No, unfortunately not. So I hope that explains the main methods of loss and how to prevent it. There are other methods, like I said. You join the army of the enemy of the Netherlands. So the Netherlands needs to be at war for that. So that's not happening these days. The other thing is you become a terrorist, not a career choice I would advise you. Unfortunately, as a terrorist, you have more rights than the people who automatically lose their nationality. Because as a terrorist, if they want to take your nationality away, you have a right to go to court, and a judge will hear your case and say, well, that's reasonable. Yes, he should lose his nationality. No, that's not reasonable. He should stay Dutch. So that happens. Some terrorists are able to keep their Dutch nationality, while the regular Dutch national can lose their nationality automatically, just because they have a bond with another country. So it's very unfair, but unfortunately that's how the law is. And even though we've been advocating change for the time, this is where we're at. Now, if you lost your Dutch nationality, come seek legal advice, because there are different routes to repair your nationality, and every route is different for everybody. There's not just one route. So government officials often say you need to go live in the Netherlands first for a year. That's the main route maybe for many, but there are some other possibilities. And so there are 2 routes that are open to everybody, and there are about 3-4 routes that could apply to other people. Okay, if the situation matches that the circumstances set by law. Okay, so if you lost your Dutch nationality, come look for legal advice, and don't think if this person could do it, I can do it as well. Don't think if this person can have another passport, another nationality, I can have one as well, because you need to comply with an exception. And if you did lose it and you want to have it back, don't think that there's only one way. And don't think that if he was able to do it, you can do it as well, because some of the routes you need to qualify for, and that differs per person. So anyway, that was my explanation. Hopefully it helped you a little bit.